have some amendments to the bill. We do not have any amendments to clause 1, so you can put clause 1.
Members, the question is that we put clause 1. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I know that the amendment sheet would have been distributed. In clause 2, in the definition of approving entity, we want to delete the words local authority or public body and substitute, therefore, the words public entity. That's one amendment. Second amendment to clause 2. In the definition of public body, delete the words but does not include an executive agency designated under the Executive Agencies Act. And the third amendment for clause 2, insert in their correct alphabetical sequence the following definitions. Public entity means a department or an agency of the government, a local authority, or a public body. And Madam Speaker, we have accepted the recommendation of the member from Eastern Portland to give a definition to resilience, and that is resilience in relation to disaster and climate change means the capacity of communities, infrastructure, institutions, economic and environmental systems to A, anticipate, prepare for, and reduce the adverse effects of disasters and climate change. B, absorb, withstand, and adapt to the impacts of disasters so as not to sustain catastrophic damage or loss. C, recover from the adverse effects of disasters in a manner that 1, restores and where practicable improves upon pre-disaster conditions. 2, reduces or eliminates future vulnerability to the effects of disasters and climate change. 3, maintains or improves the social well-being, economic productivity, and environmental integrity of affected communities. I wish to put clause 2.
You may go ahead, Opposition Leader.
Yeah, before clause 2 is put, I noticed that there's a subsection 2 in clause 2. I have no objection to the amendments as proposed to clause 2. I had pointed out that the exclusion of executive agencies in the original bill could be problematic, and I see that that exclusion is being deleted. But in subsection 2 or subclause 2 of clause 2, it allows the minister by order to amend a definition in the act. Normally, powers to amend given to a minister in relation to legislation deal with things like monetary value, such as fines, because those over time can become redundant and so on. But to amend the drafting of a provision, a definition, in this case, a definition of works, is very unusual. We don't normally give a single person in the executive the power to amend legislation, especially without it being subject to affirmative resolution, having to come to the House and the Senate for approval, because the legislation itself has been passed by the House and the Senate, or will have been before this can become law. So I think if you intend to keep a provision allowing the definition of works, which seems very comprehensive already, I'm not sure why it was seen to be necessary to have a provision allowing the minister to amend the definition of works. It's a very comprehensive definition. Works includes A, the carrying out of any of the following activities, namely construction, reconstruction, assembly, altering, manufacturing, processing, fabrication, erection, instrumentation, installation, fitting out, improvement, commissioning, decommissioning, demolition, clearance, land remediation, maintenance, repair and renovation involved with building, civil engineering, structural engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, and other engineering and technology projects. And B, goods and services incidental to the carrying out of the activities referred to in the paragraph I just read. It's a very broad, it's an immensely broad provision as is. I'm not sure what the motivation was to allow the minister to alter it. But if that's going to happen, that must come to Parliament in our submission.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The issue raised about the power to alter the definition is one that I have also noted and would ask that it be made subject to affirmative resolution. One. Secondly, in light of the clarification provided by Minister Morgan, given the definition of procure and how wide it is to say by any means, since the intention is that the procurement would take place in accordance with regulations promulgated under the Procurement Act, perhaps an amendment of that section would be advisable. To have procure mean the acquisition of goods, works, or services by any means is very wide. But the clarification was provided that it really will be done in accordance with the regulations that would be promulgated under Section 3 of the Procurement Act. So I am proposing for consideration that the definition be amended to read, procure means the acquisition of goods, works, or services in accordance with the regulations promulgated under the Procurement Act and including where necessary purchase. So it's really substituting by any means with a reference to what has been stated is intended to be in accordance with regulations to be promulgated under the Procurement Act. So second, the third point in relation to clause 2 is the definition of approving entity. And it captures, well, it states that it means a local authority or public body that exercises any statutory, regulatory, administrative, or operational function, where the exercise of that function is required for the implementation, execution, or delivery of an approved reconstruction and resilience project or a designated strategic investment project, including functions relating to A, physical planning and development controls, building controls, including the issuance of building permits and the conduct of inspections, land subdivision, land use and zoning, environmental management, natural resource conservation and environmental permits, approvals relating to water supply, sewage and drainage, roads, highways and transportation infrastructure, electricity, telecommunications and other utility services, and disaster risk management and hazard mitigation. In light of the concerns raised and how approving entity is used in the bill, including at clause 24, subclause 2, I'm just wondering, how is it contemplated that the exercise of the statutory functions and the regulatory functions will not be problematic?
Member Green and then opposition leader and members, would you please do not engage in repeating comments made by others, because once we get into that mode, we will be here forever.
Yeah.
So please only limit your comments to additional information you would like to offer instead of repeating suggestions made by other members. Thank you.
Yeah.
Member Green?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the suggestion of the member from West Central in relation to in clause 2, definition of works, that we insert the phrase that the minister may by order subject to affirmative resolution. I think that would satisfy the leader of the opposition, just to ensure that there's oversight in relation to any change to the definition, but still achieve the overall objectives of its inclusion. Outside of that, Madam Speaker, I think when the members spoke in relation to procurement, I think there isn't need for any changes in relation to that definition. I think clearly this law is subject to other laws and regulations that are part of our framework. And I think in relation to clause 2.1, approving entity, but I think member Fort really put it on the table as to how it would operationalize. I do not believe there any change is needed in relation to that part of clause 2. So I would suggest that outside of the changes already put forward, the amendments, that we also amend to include by order subject to affirmative resolution in 2A.
Member,
Yes, if I may just,
after opposition leader, then Member Hilton.
just two comments. I'm trying to be brief. The Prime Minister gave an assurance that there would be an order made under the Public Procurement Act. And in fact, I think Minister Morgan repeated that in his presentation on the bill today. Absent that, on the face of it, the two pieces of legislation don't synchronize. So I think the member from West Central's point is there ought to be a reference, if it is the intention that there will be an order under the Public Procurement Act that addresses how procurement by NARA is to take place, with a framework which we hope will be one which ensures sufficient transparency and accountability in relation to the procurement by NARA, given the massive projects which it is expected to handle. I think there ought to be a reference. So I would support that point. The other point I want to make, there's no definition of projects in the bill. Now, in clause 4, which is the functions of the authority, there are numerous references to the word project. Elsewhere in the bill, there are two categories of projects. There are the approved, one second please. There are, I want to get the phrase correct, the approved reconstruction and resilience projects, which as I understand it would be driven by the cabinet and would be public sector projects largely, though they could have partners. And then there are the private sector ones, which are the designated strategic investment projects. Those are two kind of terms of art used in the bill elsewhere. Those two. Now, what isn't clear is whether NARA is limited to those two categories of projects, the approved reconstruction and resilience projects, which are driven by the government, and the designated strategic investment projects, which are driven by the private sector, or whether under clause 4 of the bill, it is anticipated that NARA would also be able to embark on other projects not necessarily driven by cabinet. And that's an important policy decision, which I think should be clear in the legislation. So if that were so, if the feeling was that the two categories of projects are really what NARA is to concern itself with, then there should really be a definition of projects in clause 2, in the appropriate alphabetical sequence, that says projects means approved reconstruction and resilience projects and designated strategic investment projects. So that would clarify that the regime which is created in other parts of the Act, which is a developed regime, would be limited to those things, and that there isn't scope for other things that don't fall under that. If that is the intent, If it's not the intent, then I think it should be made clear that it's adding words such other projects as NARA may choose to or may execute from time to time or something along those lines. But the use of the word projects on its own, when you have those two categories used elsewhere, to my mind, creates a certain lack of clarity as to the scope of NARA, which is, I don't think we should have that lack of clarity.
There are no other projects.
Yes. Minister Morgan, I know you are piloting. Would you allow Member Hilton to go first?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That the leader of opposition observation is particularly critical because if you look at clause 21, both and subsection 2, that looks at the notwithstanding provision of any other enactment to the contrary, then it will give a even wider scope unless you define work and narrow the scope of the procurement exceptions. It would really undermine, I think, any sense of governance and in the structure that has emerged from 21 subsection 2. The notwithstanding provision takes away from any limitation. So I think the point made by the leader is critical if you're going to have language like notwithstanding any other provision or enactment to the contrary.
Thanks, Member Hilton.
Thank you, Chair. We have no challenge in accepting the amendment to Clause 2, subsection 2. The minister may, by order, alter the definition of works subject to affirmative resolution. As it relates to the other amendments suggested, I just want to mention that though, and as it was said before, the law does not specifically outline a regime of procurement, it does come under the authority of the Public Procurement Act. And I will repeat again, section 3, subsection 3, where the minister will or may, minister may by order, subject to affirmative resolution, declare that this act or any provision thereof shall not apply, and the minister will be bringing a resolution. As it relates to the list of projects, NARA's authority will be restrained to the projects approved by Cabinet, which is the list of projects. And we have said that on numerous times, and as a matter of fact, those projects will come here. So there is no contemplation that there will be, NARA will be doing every project in Jamaica. That's not the policy direction, that's not in the statute. So I want to put clause 2 as amended.
Member from St. James West Central.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to say that if we legislate that something can be done by any means, it means that it can be done by any means. And if the intention is that the procurement is to be done in accordance with the regulations, just a minute. I appreciate the concerns about the slowness in procurement. And they are real. I mean, all of us here have experienced it. But if the answer is really that the intention is to have the procurement done in accordance with those regulations, it will not achieve the objective of legislating that the procurement is to be done by any means.
Thank you, Member.
Madam Speaker, we hear the member and we put clause 2 as amended.
The question is that we put the amendment to clause 2 as written. Those in favor? Those against? Divide. Clerk.
Mr. Azan?
Members, we will continue. The count and tally is absolutely correct. The amendments passed based on the vote. I now put clause 2 as amended. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Chairman, I would like to make a marginal, in the margin, a change in clause 3 where we're going to delete the words "the," and I would like to put clause 3.
I have
Opposition leader.
a proposed proposed amendments to clause 3. I want to move the following amendment, that there be a subclause 3 added
3 what?
that would state that the function, and the reason for this, this proposed amendment, is the fact that in clause 25 of the bill, where it speaks to designating these strategic investment projects, these designated strategic investment projects, one of the criteria for doing so is that the project contributes to the achievement of the purposes of the Act. And the Act lacks any statement of its purposes. So I wish to make that clear by adding a subsection 3 to the clause 3 that would say the purposes of this Act are are to establish a statutory framework, and I'm taking this language from the Memorandum of Objects and Reasons. So it would say, the purposes of this Act are to establish a statutory framework, for the efficient, coordinated, and transparent management of extraordinary time-bound reconstruction and resilience efforts to focus on building back better to withstand future climatic and geophysical events. B, to create a more robust, climate-resilient infrastructure, encouraging better land use planning. C, to expedite private and public-private investment in priority sectors that address the structural economic vulnerabilities arising due to climate-related disasters. And D, to enable growth and diversification of Jamaica's economic base. Those are all lifted from there, except rather than, the only change I've suggested is that rather than make a specific reference to Hurricane Melissa, since this is going to be, there may be other events, I just said climate-related disasters.
That's reasonable. That is reasonable. Let's hear them.
Opposition leader, are you finished?
I am finished for that, yeah.
You may
Chairman,
go ahead.
All I would say is that that exact suggestion was a matter that was contemplated in deep detail with the legal advisors of the government, and we were advised not to pursue that route. I wish to put clause 3.
Members, those in favor? Those against? Divide. Go ahead. Go ahead, opposition leader.
The Memorandum of Objects and Reasons is strictly speaking not part of the legislation. It's attached to a bill to guide the House. But when the Act passes and it's printed in the revised laws of Jamaica, you will not see it. So this is why it is important, given that there's a specific reference, as I've said in clause 25, to the purposes of the Act, that those purposes should be manifest when you read the Act. Whatever the legal advisors to the government may say, this is a lacuna, a gap, and it's a serious omission. Yes.